Good morning and happy Monday, everybody. This is News 6 meteorologist David Nazario back here in the Digital Weather Center over at News 6. And we're going to be talking cold blast after cold blast after cold blast. Not tropics this time, thankfully. I'll admit, there is a little bit of a plug for the hurricane season, but it's not what you'd think. It's definitely nothing in terms of development or storms or anything like that. We have gone and said bon voyage to that. Today, there's a very interesting article that's trending online, and I actually wrote up a story myself on it. If you'd like to check that out over at clickorlando.com, it'll be releasing here momentarily upon the conclusion of this live stream and discussing all about that, the ins and outs. I'm not going to throw any personal takes on it. You'll see why here in a moment, but I have my thought processes. I have my feelings towards it. It's good information, and it's very worthwhile. It's definitely worth a read after such an impactful hurricane season, but that's neither here nor there. We'll go ahead and get started by first off saying hello to everybody. It looks like over on the News 6 YouTube channel, we don't have anybody popping up just yet. Hopefully they do. Let's throw some comments in there. Over on Just Weather, however, I see the chat is coming alive. Melissa Riley, good morning. Daniel Schwartz, Rick and Morty, Mimi Love Good Law, Farisha, PM, Shari, Voices from the Swamp, Jenny Hansen, good to see everybody in the chat tuning in from far and wide, not only just here in Central Florida, but also a wonderful good morning and a happy Monday to everybody joining us over on News 6 Plus. We're going to go ahead and rock into this. We'll start off with our infrared satellite shot, looking across much of the Atlantic. There's the look at the Caribbean. I wanted to fixate on this for a second because if you look down there, there is a lot of thunderstorm activity. Let me take you over to the actual free play infrared satellite here. And there's two big heavy hitters I want to point out on here real quick. And I'll go ahead and stop the loop, pull out my wonderful pen tool, and we'll doodle a little bit. So I want us to look closely up over the United States, please. Let's go ahead and look up over the U.S. And I want you to see all that we have going on across Canada and the upper half of the United States, the lower 48, from about the four corner states, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, up to the northeast. Look at this. So if you look, that is our next trough axis. It's so cool that on the satellite imagery, you can actually see where it is our next plunge of cold air is currently located. And if you notice where I have my line drawn, we've got a bit of a trough out over the west with a lot of disturbed weather action. You can see right on the leading edge of that trough in what's called the diffluent quadrant, or where the air spreads apart as a response to the nose, the front end of that trough. Look at all the showers and storms and the possible snowfall we have going on over the Midwest, the Great Lakes. It looks like Wisconsin, Minnesota, portions of Ontario, and parts of Saskatchewan in Canada are also getting it. And then notice down here in the southeast, we're pretty much void of any significant cloud cover. We still have high pressure dominating our area here from the Carolinas, Virginia, all the way back through to most of Texas right now. That is going to continue to modify. That's why our temperatures are slowly going back up. If you live down here in the southeast, we're looking at actually a fairly mild Thanksgiving. I'm personally not excited about that, but for my native Floridians out there who may be tuning in, perhaps you are a little more excited that we're going to be back into the upper 70s, low 80s for Turkey Day. But then right after that, we're going to accelerate back down into the frigid temps with the introduction of another strong front. Let's clear the ink here, and I want to take us down into the Carib, the central car, the sea car, because check all this out. I've been noticing a lot of folks on social media talking about this. Now, there's a couple things going on, okay, and I'll zoom us in so we can get real fancy with the doodles. First and foremost, we have surface high pressure to the north here, and I'll draw it in. We have surface high pressure here that rotates clockwise, like so. And if you manage to tune into a few of our previous weather briefings, these morning Metcons, remember what I'd mentioned about cold fronts all those fronts are on a map, the blues, the reds, the purples sometimes, they're just showing us the transition between one air mass to another. And so as a result, if you think about it, if we have this modifying polar high pressure here, and for those of you who may not know, when I use the term modifying, we're taking a polar air mass from up in Canada and putting it over Florida. And as a result, it's totally out of its source region where it came from. And what happens is it begins to modify as it moves over a new surface. It changes. It starts to reflect the environment with which it's now situated in. And so what we have here is we have all this polar air. In fact, I'll go ahead and go one step further and bust out some of my old analysis, and we'll go ahead and label this CP. That's an acronym for continental polar air. It's polar cold air that came from off the continent and is now marinating over the southwest Atlantic, over us and the Gulf of Mexico. On top of that, we have a surface frontal boundary right in through there. And what do we know happens all time of the year through the tropics? We have our easterly winds. So if you think about it, we have winds coming off the United States and off into the western Atlantic. We have easterlies moving through the equatorial regions and the tropics. So what we have going on is a sandwiching effect. So as you have the tropical air encompassing or encountering that continental polar air, that's why you're getting this flare-up, this extreme flare-up. We're probably seeing flood conditions down there through Jamaica. It looks like the Cayman Islands are finally getting onto the backside of the front. Hispaniola, whether it be Haiti or Dominican Republic, and eastern Cuba, all the way up into the Turks and Caicos are probably getting some very heavy rainfall with this and consistent, persistent rainfall, because as this feature goes stationary, it's not going to move anywhere. But rest assured, this is not a tropical feature. This is not a tropical cyclone. So we're not even thinking about that in terms of that department. Let's move on to the main weather headlines now, shall we? So this is going to be for all of Florida. I know at the top there it says Orlando, but for my Floridians on News 6 Plus and over on the YouTube channel News 6, for those of you who may be tuning in on just weather, bear with me. We'll get back to the national-wide or the nationwide view here momentarily, but right now we're looking at dry and pleasant conditions. We're going to be back in the 80s as early as possibly late tomorrow, if not Wednesday at the earliest. I still think maybe into tomorrow afternoon. Hottest point in the day will probably top out in the upper 70s for most of our viewing area. And then right after Thanksgiving, we're talking into Black Friday and especially Saturday, which is good for those of us who may not have time off. I'm personally going to be working the Thursday and Friday morning shows, so if you have the ability to tune in, check us out on the broadcast side of the spectrum. But this weekend and into early next week, as we intro into December, things are really going to chill out once again, which I'm really excited about. Here's a live look right now at the national temps. Going back to what we saw in the infrared, if you look, I can bring out my handy-dandy pen tool once again and show you exactly where our trough and our ridge are starting to establish itself. And you can see it right in through there where we're delineating between the blues, the lighter blues, and even the pinks up there through North Dakota and Montana. They are chilly. They are literally frozen at this point. We have 10 in Billings, 10 in Bismarck. Sioux Falls is shortly there back behind them. But then down here, you're starting to see that return flow, the air mass modification occurring with temperatures starting to get back up into, they may feel warm in consideration to what we just went through, but this is about the average for this time of year for us down here in the southeast. I got to go through it, got to say it. At least once, still no tropical development expected over the next 7 days, despite that flare-up of convection down there in the Caribbean. National Hurricane Center isn't bullseye in anything in terms of development in that department, so we are crystal clear. And I just wanted to pull this up for those of you who may still be hearing on social media, and this goes out mainly to my Just Weather folks, because I know a lot of the nationwide viewers that myself and Jonathan have, they'll get weather information from other sources, sometimes not the most. Anyways, I just wanted to pull this up real quick to put it into perspective. I know we had a very backloaded hurricane season, but if you look, I'm not too sure. There it is. I was going to say, I don't know why it was lagging for a second. If you look, we are now right at the very tail end of the season. Sure, after December 1st, we get a little bit of bleed over. There is that very rare. That's the one time I'll use that word. Kind of getting a little tired, low-key, of people saying rare all over social media. You talking about steaks? Is that how you like your beef, your red meat? You like it rare? Because nothing in the weather has been too rare these days, to tell you the truth. We do have that rare instance of a December tropical cyclone, but we're not seeing that in any department or any model data, any long range guidance. I know Climate Prediction Center has dropped everything in terms of tropical development out there outside of the moisture. And with that being said, taking a look at the Climate Prediction Center temperature outlook for the beginning parts of December, we are going to be well below average in terms of our surface temps. Once again, using this graphic here even, you could see how our pattern is going to flip. We have a trough over the west and a little bit of a back building ridge over the east. And notice how this is lopsided with what they're looking for as we go into the early first weeks of December. In reality, what this would look like is we'd now have our ridge positioned back over the four corners, the desert southwest, and a very extensive trough out across the eastern United States, which is just going to allow continuous funneling of polar air from the Canadian provinces up north. We're going to see a fairly decent look of what would be considered a La Nina winter. Now, Jonathan and I are going to be discussing that at a little bit more of a greater detail as we go through time, because there is some guidance out there, some model data that suggests we just might bounce back from our La Nina and go back into a neutral pattern. And that neutral might try to hang out for you know what in 2025. But that's neither here nor there. We're not going to talk too heavily on that. Let's focus on the holiday season. Let's focus on getting through Turkey Day. Whatever Black Friday plans you have in store, have fun. Just spend responsibly. I myself can wholeheartedly speak on that. Back when, didn't have a care in the world, was active duty military, no bills, no obligations. Black Friday meant I'm building a race car. If those of you who may not know, I love to work on cars, slowly getting back into that. So Black Friday and especially Cyber Monday was the name of the game. We're talking racing seats, new wheels, exhaust system, maybe a new ornament or some new part to bolt on under the hood to soup it up a little bit more. This year, totally different. Looking at maybe, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Gordon Ramsay, the Hexclad brand of cooking utensils and cooking products that he has for the kitchen. They have some pretty sweet Black Friday products for sale, and I'm kind of thinking about maybe pulling the trigger on that. If not, maybe some, boxing equipment or something like that. So let's see. We have anybody in the chat so far? Brian Morris over on News 6. Thank you so much, man. Naz, you the man. What a season. This was a season indeed. Was definitely a season indeed. So sorry for the small talk. I wanted to just go ahead and take the last minute 15 before we go to our first 2-minute break to just shoot the breeze with everybody, kind of make this a bit more of a personal forum as opposed to all weather, all business, especially since we don't have too much going on right now. So coming up right after the break, we're going to look at what's coming over the next 5 to 7 days, really pinpoint your Thanksgiving forecast and try to see exactly what's going to be happening between now and Thursday, and then just beyond that into the Black Friday / Cyber Monday weekend. So stand by, folks. Stick with us. We'll be back momentarily. And we're back. Thank you so much for sticking around the morning Metcon. We're back and we're going to talk clouds and rain, or in the meteorological term, we're going to look at future radar, where our cloud development is likely to occur, and the placement of our large-scale weather features. So I also wanted to give a shout out. We have a number of new folks tuning in over on Just Weather. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your Monday morning to join us here on the Just Weather and News 6 YouTube channels. So this is looking at the nationwide view. I've changed this up. I know we have a number of viewers here in Central Florida, but rock with me here. We're going to be catering to the whole audience, and that's why here very soon, more than likely after the Thanksgiving holiday, so the following week, we're going to start doing, I guess you could say, separate live streams for different audiences. We're going to be rocking with some unique content here on the News 6 channel, and then we'll also be partnering, well, honestly, Jonathan and I have always been partnered. We've been buddies doing this for a while now, just until most recently it became official. But we're going to be rocking with some new digital content for Just Weather, catering to that nationwide, almost global audience as we begin to outreach what is going on in every corner of the world in terms of significant weather. So small little shameless plug there. Let's go ahead and rock this model through time. So this is where we sit currently. You can see that we do have that front coming down, low pressure system that is brewing up over the Midwest, parts of Michigan, Wisconsin, getting into Indiana and Illinois, a infamous hotspot for severe weather. Typically this time of year, that's when we're getting severe weather up there, as well as into the spring. Thankfully, that's not the case here. This does a fantastic job of highlighting exactly where our trough is in the upper levels. So if you imagine that this is the trough axis back behind our low, old phrase we used to learn when we began to study the weather in Air Force weather in our tech school was divergence aloft, ahead of a trough. We used to love saying that again and again, divergence aloft, ahead of a trough. And we would, anyways, enough of the sillies. So out in front of your trough, you have divergence aloft. And as a result, you have the rising air creating low pressure down at the surface. And with a trough, you naturally have the cold air coming down with it. That's what creates the trough in of itself. And with that low pressure along the leading edge, that's what stirs the environment and starts to push the cold air further south, and also begins to drag warm air towards the north. That's what develops your conveyor belts or your sectors. Sometimes you'll hear the warm sector, the cold sector, the warm conveyor, the cold conveyor. Giving you all crash courses on synoptics here. They don't pay me enough for that. No, I'm just kidding. I love this. If you guys have come over from my Weather Center Nazario page, you know I love to get into the educational stuff, and that's kind of why I talk too much, and it's not for my own good. Let me go ahead and make sure I start my timer so we don't go over time, in fact. So as we go over the next couple of days, truthfully, that next front that's coming down is going to stall out. A large majority of us is going to get it, but notice that we've transitioned from a solid blue front down to a red and blue front across the Gulf of Mexico. That's because of the surging warm tropical air and moisture that's still trying to come up out of the Caribbean. The high pressure is not going to push as far south as this previous one. And so what's going to happen is here in Florida, we are going to see our winds pick up. That's what's going to help to warm us up a little bit as we go through Wednesday and especially Turkey Day on Thursday. But then back behind that, if I continue on with the model graphic here, watch what happens over the plains. You see that? We get a Colorado low. It's a bit of regime meteorology for you. So what's happening is we have our next dip in the jet stream getting ready to come down. Make sure I have my pen tool selected. There we go. We have our next dip in the jet stream preparing to come down, and this low pressure has now entered that divergent quadrant, the divergent area ahead of the trough. I hope you guys remember that saying. And so what's going to happen here is we're going to have a whole new area of warm air coming up from the south and then cold air coming in from the north. And that's what's going to help to not only intensify the movement of that cold air out of the Rockies, but we're also going to see the deepening of this next parent low pressure that's really going to stir up the atmosphere and bring down all sorts of polar air. Watch this. You can see this could possibly be some severe weather for the Midwest, parts of the Appalachians getting into the mid-Atlantic. And then that high pressure, notice how it completely vacates almost all of the central and northern Rockies, even getting down into Arizona and New Mexico. This looks like it could possibly be a backdoor front scenario for them down there, to where they actually get a cold front because of the mountains to the north out of the east. That's what we used to call a backdoor front at the 25th OWS, where I used to work a couple years ago when I was active duty Air Force weather. You'd actually have the fronts coming in out of the east as opposed to the traditional northwest. And then if you look out over the eastern United States, we have lots of warm air surging up towards the north, across the mid-Atlantic, the southeast, our viewing area here in central Florida. Look at the timestamp. This is Wednesday at 11 p.m. So see how everything's lining up? You get this next system to rock through, initiate the movement of the air on either side, and that's why Wednesday and then into Thursday, we're looking at upper 70s to low 80s for much of us, not only here in Florida. You can see as we go into Thanksgiving, by Thanksgiving evening, we should start to see that front coming through. A majority of us before Thanksgiving is all said and done with, especially if you're up in the Northeast, the Great Lakes, the Appalachians, getting through the Mid-Atlantic, such as the Virginia area, the Carolinas, a bulk of Georgia, you'll be through the front. Here down in Florida, we'll still be mixing all that in. We'll still feel a little bit of that leftover humidity getting pulled north. That warm sector will stay in place. But then if I go just a little further in time into Black Friday, I'll turn the actual surface analysis off since we've stopped the clock here. Or actually, I'll go ahead and leave it on, but I'll extrapolate, use another term for you. Our low pressures here in the front has now pushed this far to the south. So we are now starting to get through the cold front, and that's why temps are going to start to drop for us in the Florida Peninsula through late in the day on Friday and especially into Saturday. But the rest of us are already going to be marinating under those cooler temps in that next blast of polar air from up north, which I'm sure is good news for many. Some of us may not like the cold air as much. Taking a look at our wind overlay, it does a fantastic job of kind of showing the punch that each of these fronts have. If I go very quickly through time, notice how as the front comes through portions of the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, I'll break my pen out so you guys can see where I'm talking. Right in through there is where your front is located. You see how the winds are a little lackluster? I'll go full screen so you can get a better view. If you look, we have our blue arrows coming out of the north, but there really isn't too much of a response in the wind speeds themselves. The different colors here are going to be your wind velocities. If you look down over near the Bahamas, we have a very strong area of winds, maybe 20 to 30 knots of wind. Nearest to the Great Lakes, it looks like we're getting up there into the 35 knot plus threshold. But then right along the frontal boundary, we're looking maybe, 5, 10 knots, 15 max, depending on where you are. And if there are any kind of terrain influences up in the Appalachians, perhaps, that might try to allow some of that cooler air to funnel through. Then if I really quickly fast forward through the rest of the week, see what happens here. Look at that whopper of a front. Now you can see an even stronger push of cold air coming through. You can see the winds literally surging out of Canada. You could draw lines from the Dakotas, from Montana, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. That is where our advection, the movement of that cold air, will be occurring. And look at the low pressure up there over the northeast. Look at those winds just ripping out of the south. That's the warm sector, your warm conveyor, really surging off towards the north where the low pressure center is located. And we have very strong winds, especially back over the water, gusting upwards of 20 to 30 knots. So it goes to show, if you remember on a couple of previous live streams, there's two distinct winds, especially with these frontal boundaries. You have your pressure gradient winds, which is simply the changing between lower pressure to higher pressure, but then you also have what's called a thermal wind, to where warm air is much less dense, it weighs less than cold air, so naturally, kind of like your pressure gradient force, as the warm air gets pushed out of the way by your cold air, as that new, much denser, more heavy in mass, air mass comes through, that's what's going to increase the surface winds as well. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch. You get your jab in there and then the right cross with your thermal wind adding to what we can feel here down at ground level. So not this first one. The first one is going to be felt for many of us outside of the upper Gulf coastline, from about Louisiana, New Orleans, through Pensacola, and then through the Florida Peninsula. The second one, as we go through Thursday and especially Friday, is when we're really going to realize those temps dropping pretty extravagantly once again before another potential dose of cold weather comes through in about another 5 to 7 days. We're going to be following that cyclic pattern, that repetition this time of year that we usually see. This is going to be a look at our temps as we go through time. So if you notice, Monday into Tuesday, we're starting to see those temps climbing up more and more. The Florida Peninsula is a little more orange than it was last week and even today. And then Wednesday, you'll notice we'll be at our peak. Look at all the oranges down across pretty much everybody. And I want to note here that there is an interesting setup going on. Remember the warm conveyor. If you notice, we have this little kink in the blue and orange shades. That's where your front is. That's your cold front there, folks. And then notice how now much of Texas is bathed in those darker shades of orange. That's the warm sector coming up. You can actually see the movement of the warm air to the north, even just looking at our surface temp map. You look at these long enough and you can kind of just get a feel for what's happening in the atmosphere just based off the colors. So if I had to draw you an analysis just willy-nilly for the fun of it, just using this, you have a low pressure somewhere in through here. Here's our cold front. And then the warm front is somewhere back in through here, kind of all cockeyed because of the mountains that we have up here. We still have higher pressure to the north over the Great Lakes, so it's not going to be able to go as far to the north as rapidly as our cold air coming down to the south. But then notice, as a matter of fact, the southeast quadrant and the deep south of the United States are completely smothered by the warm air, and then we have up over the Rockies that cold air really quickly surging down to the south. And if I continue the loop forward, bam, there goes the front coming down, and then by Friday, we'll go Friday morning as we're getting ready to start our Black Friday chaos, or I should say, delve into the chaos that is Black Friday. Hopefully more organized than unorganized. That remains to be seen every year. Now you can see that front has swept across the United States, and the only folks still waiting to receive it is going to be Central Florida near the attractions, Tampa Bay, down to good old Miami. But if I go just a bit further to Saturday, now we're talking. You look at Saturday morning, coldest point of the day. We'll go back to about 7 a.m. 6 to 7 o'clock is usually the coldest point. Now you can see that Miami still sitting comfortably at 64. Orlando down to potentially 48. There is room for these numbers to change. Tampa at 46. Jacksonville down to 41. And then just a little further to the north, our neighbors in Georgia are looking at sub 32 degrees, which means we are below freezing up there as well. This is going to be kind of the song and dance for this weekend. 30s to the northern portions of the peninsula, 40s, and a little bit warmer than that the further south you go. And then finally, as we get ready to tie everything into a nice bundle, we have this wonderful Thanksgiving graphic, just with some kind of key takeaways that I love to emphasize to everybody. So as we go through the rest of the week until Black Friday, Thanksgiving included, we're going to be looking at scattered clouds, 80s across the peninsula of Florida. This will expand out from there as well. We saw the temps in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia as well, getting up into those low 80s because of the warm front coming through. And then evenings are going to be kind of breezy because of the movement of all that air. And eventually we'll dip back down into some very cold temps once we get fully into the weekend. And that's that, folks. That's all she wrote for today's Monday Metcon. Do I have any questions in the chat? See how we're doing on time. We're going to have to wrap up really quick. Mick and Marley, good to see you. No worries. You can always watch on replay. How cold is it going to get after Thanksgiving? Melissa, pretty much the same as what we saw now, the low to mid 40s to start the day, getting into the 60s as we go through the hottest part of the day. Time Traveler Karen, happy early Thanksgiving to you as well. I'll be in Long Island for the 5th through the 8th. Should I worry about super cold or bad weather? Probably cold, Zachary, to tell you the truth. I'll dial in a little bit more of that potential severe weather, or I should say at least significant weather forecast over the next 1 to 2 days. Erie Tropicals, unfortunately, not too much rain in sight. These fronts are not going to have very much oomph or gusto in terms of moisture. They're more so just dry and cold. We'll have to wait and see just how long it'll take to really rebuild our subtropical air mass down here, and then finally, get back to the swing of things with rain. But unfortunately, this is going to be that La Nina, almost drought-ish kind of setup for Florida. But alrighty, folks, that's all she wrote. We'll talk to you again very soon. I hope you have a great rest of your Monday. Please check out that article on clickorlando.com if you want to hear a little bit about possibly how climate change influenced the hurricane season, but we won't dabble too much into that. I hope that you get your plans ironed out, and if you are traveling for the holidays, safe travels. We will see you again very soon, but until then, this is the Digital Weather Center signing out.